The United Nations wants Hamas rule in Gaza. What's the problem? Well, Hamas is the problem, but there's another problem. Hamas steals the aid that is meant for the Gazan population in Gaza. So the UN came up with a solution. Well, they say Hamas should run Gaza to keep the aid safe. Now, I know this doesn't make any sense, but the fact is that the United Nations has been asking since almost October 8th, 2023, for Hamas, which is the fox, to guard the Gaza aid, which is the henhouse. Yes, it is that crazy. The UN is working hand in hand, or hand in gun, I should say, with Hamas. And here's how. The United Nations agency UNRWA supplies some of the aid going into Gaza. UNRWA has tens of thousands of workers, thousands of whom are Hamas terrorists on staff. And in fact, 7 of them were directly recorded and involved in the October 7th massacre. UNRWA leaders are also the leaders of Hamas. UNRWA's Gaza headquarters was above and supplied power to Hamas's headquarters. So when UNRWA brought in aid, who escorted it into Gaza? That's right, Hamas. Well, Hamas turned around and sold that aid on the black market, and they earned over $500 million selling stolen aid since the 7th of October 2023 until today. Hamas is getting rich off the aid that is supposed to go to the Gazan people. In recorded conversations that have been released and you can find online by the Israel Defense Forces, we can overhear Hamas terrorists saying that they stole so much UNRWA aid that their warehouses are full. At the same time, UNRWA, which is the cover for Hamas, keeps demanding more and more aid. But United Nations' demand for more Gazan aid are really demands for Hamas's salaries to increase, because the more aid that comes in is the more aid that Hamas sells in the black market, which is the more aid that they make, the more money they make in the black market. Now, UNRWA finally admits that some of the aid is being stolen, but when Israel offered to protect United Nations Relief and Works Agency convoys, they refused. And what was UNRWA's answer? Well, who do you think they wanted to protect their convoys? Well, we all know the answer. They said they want Hamas to be put in charge and protect their convoys. So the United Nations is insisting that Hamas protect the convoys that Hamas steals the aid from, which they sell in the black market. Don't be fooled. UNRWA is Hamas, Hamas is UNRWA, and of course, therefore, UNRWA's solution is to restore Hamas. If you're watching, please tell your leaders to join the courage of the Netherlands and Sweden, who just last week defunded UNRWA because they knew that if they're funding UNRWA, they're funding Hamas. It's time to shut down Hamas's UN front, stop the financing of murder and this war that Hamas is dragging on. Iran, as we know, is losing the 7-front war in the Middle East. But Iran is still attacking now in a new front, the 8th front, in the West, in Europe. Iran is targeting Jewish communities, Israeli embassies, and institutions across the West. Shockingly, reports came out in the Bloomberg News showing that Iran is now using child terrorists for their attacks. European governments are reporting Israel's embassies in Sweden, Denmark, and Belgium were all attacked by teenage terrorists. These are kids who should be out babysitting, working selling pizzas, or playing football, but instead they're being paid and financed by Iran to attack Israelis and Jews in Europe. These attackers are 16, 15, 14, and even a 13-year-old. They used real guns, bombs, and Iran recruited them all directly on social media. This isn't random. It's a calculated effort by the Iranian regime to expand its proxy war, which is being lost in the Middle East, to the West using kids. Sweden and Norway even started controlling their open border due to this Iranian threat. Now, Iran isn't only attacking Jews and Israelis. We're, of course, the first. Jews and Israelis are often the first. But we know when terror attacks Jews and Israelis, it eventually reaches free citizens of the rest of the world as well. Therefore, British intelligence also warned of attacks. Last month, Germany charged 4 Hamas members for helping run terror attacks in Europe. The 4 attackers hid weapons where? In Denmark, Poland, and Bulgaria for terror attacks, like the one they carried out in Germany. But that's not all. British security forces revealed 15 Iranian plots to either kidnap or kill British or UK-based individuals whom it considers enemies of the regime. British bomb squads detonated suspected explosive devices in a London airport, in a train station, and just outside the US Embassy. Iran tried assassinating the former Canadian Minister of Justice, Irwin Cutler, who's a prominent member of Canada's Jewish community. Earlier this year, American officials announced Iranian plots to assassinate political leaders in the United States and to manipulate elections. Iran is down, and they've lost a lot in the Middle East, but they're not out of fuel yet. Their terrorism and their thirst for blood is now directed at the West, and it is real. We have to remember, just like in the Holocaust, what starts with the Jewish people does not end with them. I would now like to take some of your questions from the audience watching live on social media. But before those questions come in, I just want to throw something out for you. This is the end of the new year. And this is the time when the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office is really geared to trying to raise funds once again to support these efforts. We put links in all of our bios on all of our social media. This is a chance for you to take a step and help us do what we do. All of this costs money. The studios, the people who are speaking, the people who are working behind the cameras in order to bring this information to you and people all around the world. So just take a second and click, and please support our initiative. Now I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you, Doron. Our first question is from Daniel on Instagram. With all the evidence of UNRWA members participating in October 7th, shouldn't the UN as a whole be held responsible?
Yes. That's the answer. However, since the UN is not holding UNRWA responsible, and the UN, if anything, is constantly criticizing Israel, we have to look into the UN and ask ourselves, is not the United Nations, which was a body that was created post-World War II to stop tyranny, like the Holocaust and like Nazi Germany from happening again, if they are only focusing on Israel, which is the only democracy in the Middle East, perhaps the UN itself has been infiltrated. Maybe it's time for us to open our eyes, and you bring up a very good question. All we have to do is to open our eyes and look. If the UN is criticizing Israel, if it took the UN months to admit that Israeli women were raped and tortured on October 7th, then maybe the problem is with the United Nations. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Our next question is from Aviva on YouTube. There have been lots of reports about a potential hostage deal recently. Do we know what the latest on these reports are?
Bringing our hostage home, Aviva, is the wish and hope of every single Israeli. As you may know, we're a very small country of 10 million people. Everyone either knows a hostage or a family of a hostage. We all know people who unfortunately have been killed. We pray and we're acting to bring those hostages home. The reports in the news say that a deal is very, very close. Now, the details of such a deal are not something that I have access to, and even if I did, it's obviously not something we can speak about publicly, but we are all for a deal taking place, a deal that on one hand brings our hostages home, and at the same time does not enable Hamas to stay in power, which would enable them, God forbid, to attack Israel again and bring more hostages. That is the challenge that Israel is dealing with, but we're hoping for the best.
Our next question is from Nomi on Instagram. The American show 60 Minutes just published a report about how the Mossad managed to explode beepers in the hands of thousands of Hezbollah terrorists at the same time. What are your thoughts on this?
I saw the episode and I think it was incredibly important to see. This was coordinated with the Mossad. Therefore, the people that were sent there were under agreement with the Mossad that they were allowed to release secrets that went into the beeper and walkie-talkie attacks against Hezbollah leadership. This is a unique opportunity to see how Israel, in fact, tries to defeat its enemies. Israel is a small country surrounded by large countries, surrounded by Iran, whose population is almost 10 times that of Israel, along with other countries whose collective populations that are aggressive to Israel are 30 and 40 times Israel. What does Israel rely on? Israel thinks out of the box. The very theme of the Mossad is you will defeat your enemies by thinking carefully, kind of out of the box. It's actually a quote from the Bible. And so the beepers show Israeli ingenuity, which goes back more than a decade, which came about to plan this operation. However, there's something else that we need to pay attention to. Those two Mossad agents on 60 Minutes explained how for days and weeks, Israelis calculated the exact amount of explosives in those beepers so that they would injure or maim a Hezbollah terrorist without affecting any person next to them. So if they're walking and they're surrounded by family, they'll pick up the beeper. It will injure them, putting them out of commission, while hopefully not injuring anyone else around. Can we imagine any other army in the world that would go to that much care to try to take out an enemy that is trying to kill you and at the same time try to protect their own families? By the way, the very families that those same terrorists put in the line of fire by hiding behind them. Thank you for your question.
Our next question comes from Irene on Instagram. Is it possible that Turkey will decide to get involved in these conflicts created by the Islamic regime?
Turkey is a NATO member. We have to remember that Turkey is actually a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They're the most important mutual security and military organization in the entire world. Many of us have visited Turkey. It was a fine country once upon a time. Erdogan, the current head of Turkey, is a dictator who has pushed his country to the limit. They are now making serious moves into Syria, which has been vacated since the overthrow of Assad. Israel is keeping its eye very carefully on Turkey, as is the Western world. Our hope is that Turkey will focus on rebuilding its economy, which is in shambles, and orienting its country more towards the West and towards democracy and freedom for all people, as opposed to trying to orient itself with Russia, China, and Iran. That's our hope. We're keeping our eyes open, and we're hoping for the best.
Thank you. Our next question is from Twitter. Jews around the world feel that they need to hide their Judaism out of fear for their safety. What is your advice to proud Jews who want to stand up to this?
Well, my advice I would take simply from the Hanukkah story. Hanukkah is coming in 2 days, and what is the Hanukkah story? Jews were under threat and even under attack, both culturally and physically, by the Syrian Greeks 2,200 years ago, who said they could no longer have Brit Milah, they couldn't keep kosher, they couldn't learn Torah, they couldn't keep Shabbat. They pressured, they killed Jews who were against them until Jews stood up against them, which are called the Maccabees. Those Jews fought and actually defeated the Greeks by standing proud for who they are. But you know how many people, according to the book of Maccabees, showed up for that first fight against the Greeks? 20 people. All it took was 20 people to take the first stand against the Greeks who were trying to kill them with their back straight, to stand tall and say, enough. We, the Jewish people, have the right to practice our own faith and religion and be who we are. And those 20 people created a tidal wave of support amongst the Jewish people who stood up tall and eventually threw off the Greek Empire. If we could throw off the Greek Empire 2,200 years ago, then all of you who are standing tall set an example for those around you, and hopefully there'll be even more than 20 of you, and you'll create a sense of pride that will reinforce Jewish strength in the diaspora. Trust me, our enemies are looking for you to put your heads down and slink into some corner. That's what they're hoping. But when you stand tall, just like Israel has stood tall over the last year and a half, you find that your enemies, which seem to have so much strength, just manage to scuttle away like little mice.
Thank you, Doron. Our next question is from Christine on Instagram. Why is Israel expected to give so many more terrorists in exchange for hostages? The ratio seems very unfair.
Well, we prefer to give no terrorists back for hostages. I mean, our hostages are the most precious thing in the world. We value life. The hostages are children, men and women who were literally ripped from their beds and driven into Gaza on motorcycles while they saw their families being killed in front of them. and put in the most hellish conditions in underground tunnels. And on the other hand, we have Hamas terrorists who have blood on their hands in Israeli jails. There's nothing equal about this whatsoever. Israel doesn't want to put bloody killers back on the street. But we realize, because of what happened on October 7th, the terrible tragedy, we're going to have to make painful decisions in order to bring our people home. That's how much we value life. I think this shows, while it's very difficult, a powerful side of the Jewish people, that we're doing something so painful, willing to do something so painful to bring our loved ones home.
Thank you. This is our last question. Adam on Instagram asks, the US is the biggest player in the UN. Can they not force the UN to get their act together?
The US is a large and powerful country. They're also the greatest friend of Israel, and Israel is certainly hoping that the United States, but not alone, other countries around the world will see the sham that the United Nations has turned into and put down their foot, defund the United Nations until they turn into what they were supposed to be. An international body of countries that are here to protect freedom, not an international body of countries that have been hijacked by terrorists that is out to protect them. That's certainly our hope. That's what Israel's doing. And we turn to people around the world to pressure your own countries, defund the United Nations until they change their ways. Let's all try to make this world a better place. Thank you for joining me. That's all we have time for. I appreciate your tuning in. We'll be back on tomorrow at 3 p.m. Israel time, 8 a.m. East Coast time. We're here every day to take your questions. We're here for you. Thank you for being here for us. And remember, click that button to support us. This is the end of the year, and this is the time when we want to have a strong beginning for the Israel Citizen Spokespersons Office for next year. Thank you.